Good morning. It's good to see you, and we're grateful to be together. And I know we have some who are out of pocket because it is our spring break around here, and several of our families are traveling and away from us. But I also know that we have visitors here, and if you are visiting with us, we are very grateful for your presence. Thank you for coming our way. We hope everybody sticks around for our Sunday school hour. We have classes for all ages when we're finished here. And we should just all be grateful for the privilege and the opportunity of coming together in God's name to worship Him and to thank Him for the gift of His Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you for being here today. In James chapter 5, verse 12, James is nearing the end of his epistle. And by the way, this is thought to be possibly the first letter, the first epistle, chronologically speaking, of the New Testament. And James is wrapping things up. And he begins a sentence with these words. This is James chapter 5, verse 12, the first part. He says, "But above all, my brothers," and we could add, "and sisters," he's speaking to the entire church here. "But above all," now don't read that yet if you've got your Bible open. Don't look down. Don't cheat. That's what we're talking about today, by the way. If you were to guess, what comes next? What do you think James is going to say? Brooks, don't advance it yet. I know you aren't. He's giving me the thumbs up. He's on it back there. "Above all, my brothers," what comes next? Flee sexual immorality? Possibly. We wouldn't be surprised by that. That is, of course, supremely important, and we've spent the last couple weeks in our worship time, in our sermon time, talking about that in various ways, but that's not what he says. "Go and seek and save the lost." We also would not be shocked by that. We know from the Gospels that was Jesus' mission, that was His purpose, and that's our purpose as Christians. There are lost people in the world that need to hear the gospel, that need to be saved. We are to seek them out. But that's not what comes next. "Pray without ceasing." That's what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians. And of course, that's what we should be doing. We should keep that line open between us and God at all times. We should be praying regularly. And for that reason, we're focused on prayer this year. That's our theme for 2021, the power of prayer. But he doesn't say that. He says in James chapter 5, verse 12, "But above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear." Now we can advance it. Do not swear. And he's not talking about not using foul language, which of course, as Christians, we should not. But that's a different topic. That's a different sermon. No, we're speaking here, James is speaking here about taking oaths. He says, above all, don't take an oath, don't swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, that you may not fall under condemnation. Interestingly, James here quotes, or nearly quotes, Jesus himself. Jesus, who was James' biological half-brother, but more importantly, Jesus, who was his Lord, his master. And the teaching of his Lord comes through loud and clear in James' own words in chapter 5, verse 12. And this is a teaching laid out in the Sermon on the Mount. It's a passage that is about so much more than just swearing oaths. We continue to be in the Sermon on the Mount, in our series called Best Sermon Ever. And I hope you're not tired of it yet, because we're not leaving it anytime soon. I think, as I said a couple weeks ago, this is time well spent. Time digging into the words of Jesus in his first sermon recorded in the Gospels, in the most famous sermon ever preached. Now, we will take a break next week for Easter, and we'll focus on the resurrection that day, but then we'll return to this series throughout the rest of April and into May. And this morning, our text is Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, and I'd invite you to turn there, and we'll be turning to a few other places as well. But go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, and that's where we'll begin this morning, with Jesus saying this: Again, you have heard that it was said, and this construction now should be familiar to you. Jesus begins all the sections, or most of them at least, in chapter 5 in this way. Again, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. Now here, Jesus is not, as he has the past few sections, he's not quoting directly from the Old Testament. These are not verbatim words from one of the books of the law, but instead, Jesus is summarizing several passages from the Old Testament. And I'd like to look at just a few of those. And this is going to be like our Bible study portion of the sermon. I mean, of course, it is all drawn from the Scriptures, and I want the Lord to speak through me from start to finish. But we're going to look at a few verses to kind of establish how Old Testament folks, how the Israelites, God's people under the Old Covenant looked at taking oaths. So let's look pretty quickly. I want you to maybe keep your place in Matthew chapter 5, slide your ribbon through that page, and go all the way back to the second book of the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. And let's look at a few passages quickly as we think about what Jesus is saying here, the body of teaching that he is summarizing here. Exodus 20 records for us the Ten Commandments, the third of which is this in verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And truly, if someone was to take an oath by the name of the Lord and then not follow through, and then not, if they were to swear falsely, not keep their oath, they would be then taking the name of the Lord in vain. And this is established for us in Leviticus chapter 19. So go there next, Leviticus chapter 19. We're looking at several of these books from the first 5 books, the Pentateuch or the Torah of the Old Testament, the books of the law. Leviticus 19:12, God's law says, you shall not swear by my name falsely. In other words, swear by my name, but then not follow through on what you said you do. And so profane the name of your God. You'd be taking my name in vain. I am the Lord. A couple more. Numbers chapter 30, verse 2. Numbers 30, verse 2, in which we read, if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So don't dare take an oath and then break it. And then Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 21. And we'll just read 21, but it continues the next few verses. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. So we learn in these verses, and we would learn in many others that we're not going to take the time to look at, that taking oaths, even oaths in God's name, was permitted, and it was commonplace in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20 shows us that it was acceptable to take an oath in the name of God as long as you were going to keep it. Verse 20, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. We even find in the pages of the Scriptures God swearing oaths. As in Genesis chapter 9, when God pledged or promised to never again destroy the earth by means of a flood. Or in Luke chapter 1, verse 73, when Zechariah is thinking about the oath that God made to Abraham, which he is now fulfilling through the arrival of Jesus Christ. So, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, when Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. Indeed, they had heard it. They had heard what Jesus reminds them of here. There's a lot in the Old Testament about taking oaths. But then, surprisingly, Jesus says, starting at verse 34, I say to you, you've heard it said, but I say to you, do not take an oath at all. either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. He's not talking about hair dye here, okay, just to be clear. He says, don't take an oath by any of those things. Why the dramatic change, Jesus? Why the about face from the body of teaching in the Old Testament? Well, I'll tell you why. Oaths were, of course, designed to encourage truthfulness. To make it, I'm quoting a commentator here, to make it, truthfulness that is, the more solemn and sure. To guarantee the truth of one's statements. But by Jesus' time, there was this entire legalistic system that had been built up around oath-making. In the Jewish code of law called the Mishnah, and I believe this makes the second consecutive sermon in which I mentioned the Mishnah, which will probably never happen again. The Mishnah, this written body of Jewish oral traditions, there is one whole tractate given over to the question of oaths, including detailed consideration of when they're binding and when they're not. For example, one rabbi says, if you swear, now listen very carefully, or you'll miss this. If you swear by Jerusalem, you are not bound by your vow. But if you swear toward Jerusalem, then you are bound by your vow. So what has happened in Jesus' day, or by Jesus' day, is instead of reinforcing truth, oaths became a means of fostering lies. And it was the case that only when you swore by something very sacred, did you have to tell the truth. Otherwise, you were free to lie and to deceive. And so in place, operative in Jesus' day, was this system of loopholes whereby one could more easily deceive. So this was the exact opposite of God's intention. When it comes to oath making, it turns out that we human folk are quite skillful in distorting and using the law of God in order to break His will. What is our problem? And so Jesus comes along and says, you've heard it said this, but I say to you, just don't. When I look around and see what oath-making, oath-taking has become, I'm going to put a stop to it. So let me tell you, don't swear on the name of God, and don't swear on heaven, and don't swear on Jerusalem, and don't swear on your head or anything else, because God created it, and God stands behind it, and I've had quite enough of your weaseling around my Father's will and His law so that you can do the opposite of what He told you to do, which was to be truthful, which was to be honest, which was to not lie and deceive. You are using a good command of God in order to break His law. Why did this happen? Something good twisted into something bad. I think I know. And it speaks to our human nature. And when I say that, I mean our sinful nature, our fleshly side. Though we are generally committed to honesty, we also like to lie and to deceive. And if you think I'm being a little too harsh, okay, all right, I'll back off a little bit. Maybe we don't like it, but we are prone to it, aren't we? We are prone to twist the truth, to fudge the facts. Oh, we believe in honesty until we want to impress someone. A preacher stood before his congregation one Sunday and said, next week I'm going to preach about the sin of lying. And to prepare your minds and your hearts for the sermon, I want you to go home and I want you to read Mark chapter 17 before you come next week. So next week came around and the congregation got together and he said, last week I told you I was going to preach about the sin of lying and I asked you to read Mark 17. Who read Mark 17? And every hand in the auditorium shot up. And he said, well, that's interesting because Mark only has 16 chapters. Let me now proceed with my sermon about the sin of lying. Oh, we believe in honesty. We think it's important until we want to impress somebody, and then we'll distort the truth, the facts a little bit in order to please them. Oh, we believe in truthfulness and honesty until we want to succeed. We could very well say that there is a cheating epidemic in our country. I'm speaking of students in school. This is very disturbing. Multiple studies show that virtually every student cheats. Not every student all the time on everything, but almost all students surveyed, interviewed, say that at some time in their college career, their high school career, they cheat. The pressure is high to succeed, and the temptation is great, and it's all too easy. And so they take the easy way out. They take a shortcut, and they lie and they cheat. But we believe in honesty and integrity until it gets in the way of us achieving our dreams and our goals, until it gets in the way of our success. We believe in honesty. Oh, we're all about it. Until we're afraid. Until we feel that we are in danger. I don't know that man, he said. I've never seen him before. But then somebody else came along and said, no, you were with him. I saw you with him. No, I wasn't. And he called down curses on himself from heaven, and he swore up and down he'd never been around him. Didn't know him from Adam. Well, then a whole group came along, and they said, no, you were with him, and we know that you were because your accent gives you away. And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen him before in my life. And that's when Peter heard a sound in the distance. It was the sound of a rooster crowing. And that's when he remembered what his Lord Jesus told him. Before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And he caught Jesus' eye in that moment as Jesus stood trial. And he went out and he wept bitterly. Oh, we all believe in honesty and truthfulness until we feel threatened, until we feel afraid, until we feel that our safety or even our lives are at risk. Are you still not convinced that we have a problem with truthfulness? Listen to some of the words that pepper our language. No, really. That's the word I want to talk about. Really. The word really. No, really, it happened. Really. I'm not making this up. Really. Why do we need that word? Why do we need that extra word in there? What about seriously? No, seriously. Seriously. I'm not making it up. Seriously. Why do we need that in our language? I promise. This happened. I promise I was there. I saw it. I promise. Why do we need all those words in our language? Or think about some of our phrases. The phrase, with a grain of salt. You know somebody who you would say to someone else, you need to take what that person says with a grain of salt. We use that phrase when we talk about somebody whose words we view with suspicion. Or sometimes we'll say, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Meaning, we're going to stand by what we said even though we know that it might not be quite right, when it might be suspect. So we believe in honesty, we do. But that's not always the story that we live by. That's not always the principle that is operative in our lives. And we say, oh, I didn't really lie. I told a white lie. You see how we soften it? I told a fib. I didn't outright lie, but you might have deceived. You might have covered your tracks in such a way that, you didn't come out and tell an untruth. You didn't speak falsely, but you behaved deceptively. We have a problem with truthfulness, and it seems to me that we, as much as the people gathered on that hillside listening to Jesus, we need to hear what he has to say here. We need to hear his instruction. In verse 37, when he's finished laying out what they had heard and what he has to say instead on oaths. He says in verse 37, let what you say be simply yes or no. Leave it at that. Yes or no. No or yes. And he says, anything more than this comes from evil. And some manuscripts have instead comes from the evil one. So Jesus says to us, as his people, as his followers, if you belong to me, if you're part of my family, my tribe, my kingdom, then you be a person of your word. You be a person of your word. You be so defined by truthfulness and integrity that you don't need anything other than a yes or a no to be believed when you make a statement. Now, does Jesus completely ban oath-taking? I don't think so, because we later find Paul taking oaths by God's name. And I assume that Paul would have been familiar with the teaching of Jesus on this matter. But in Romans chapter 1, verse 9, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23, and in other places as well, we find Paul taking oaths. And so I don't think that it's problematic, if you're wondering, for Christians to take an oath in a courtroom, to lay your hand on a Bible and to say, I promise to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I don't think it's problematic for Christians to say the Pledge of Allegiance, so to speak, as long as we know that our ultimate allegiance is not to the country in which we find ourselves, but to the kingdom of God. I don't think it's problematic. What Jesus is saying here, the core, the bottom line of what he's trying to convey is that our yes and our no shouldn't need shoring up with other words. You shouldn't need an oath to be viewed as truthful and honest. And you shouldn't need a really and a seriously and an I promise and all the other words that we throw in there to make what we're saying more believable. We follow the truth, capital T. I'm talking about a person. I'm talking about Jesus Christ, the embodiment of God's truth. John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, Jesus said, and the truth and the life. That is who we follow. And our enemy, in contrast, is called in John chapter 8, verse 44, the father of lies. So you tell me, if you're someone who has fallen into a pattern of lies and deception based on that, to whom have you placed your allegiance in? Who are you following? The truth or the father of lies? What I'm saying is, if we profess to be people who follow the truth, then we must tell the truth. We must tell the truth in every matter, in every compartment of our life, on every topic. We must be forthright, honest, truthful people full of integrity. So, we cannot fudge the facts when we want to make ourselves look better. And I know we're tempted to do that. We want to our employers, to our spouses, to our friends, we want to polish off the rough edges. We want to present a better version of ourselves. That can be dangerous. We shouldn't do that. We can't fudge the facts to make ourselves or our position, our argument look better. We don't need to exaggerate and go overboard in making the case for our position, our argument. I once read about a famous politician. I won't say his name. You would know him. But I don't have to tell you who it is, because this is the truth with a lot of politicians. Somebody said he could go to a party, a get-together, and talk to 10 different people with 10 different viewpoints. And at the end of the night, when those 10 people would leave, they thought that he agreed with them. Is that how we operate? Now, I'm not saying we can't try to build consensus and try to find common ground and try to work towards unity despite our differences, but we dare not misrepresent ourselves or our position. Let's let our yes be yes and our no be no. We must not pass along possibly false information. Gossip among God's people is a problem. We love to be in the know. We love to feel important. We love to pass along that juicy bit of news that we just received because it gives us a little bit of excitement. But you don't know if that's true. You didn't do your homework to figure out if the veracity of that. And even if it was true, is it your place to be passing it along? We have to nip that in the bud. We cannot be Christian gossips. We can't be passing along information we don't know to be true. We can't be doing that on social media. We can't be passing along these memes that we see other people sharing, and we think to ourselves, I bet that's true, or that sounds right. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. For us, we have a higher calling. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. We are expected by our Lord to be truthful and honest in every matter of life, so that's not good enough. Sometimes we'll say, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm going to put it out there so that, we can think about it, maybe. People need to know that this is out there at least, and I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to pass it along. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. We can't be people who pass along false information, and we must do what we pledge to do. When we tell somebody we're going to do something, we've got to do it. And if we don't think that we'll be able to do it, we don't need to tell them that we're going to do it in the first place. And I know that's hard, because I know we want to make people happy. And I know on the front end, we want to say, yes, I'll take care of it, but it makes it a lot harder on the back end when we don't get it done. And we develop a reputation of being people who do not keep our word. We don't need to tell people we're going to pray for them if we don't intend to do that. I have fallen into this trap, and if I don't think that I will remember to pray, what I'll say is, I will say a prayer for you. I don't say I'll be praying for you, because that commits me to pray often. And I don't know if I will, because I have several people that I want to be praying for, and I doubt my own ability to be able to remember. I don't trust in my own memory enough to think that I will pray for that request every day. So I'll just say, I will say a prayer for you, and in that moment, I will say a prayer so that I could be a person of my word. Or if I don't think I'm going to be able to pray, or if I'm not in a position to pray, I'll just say something like, God be with you, or God bless you, or God comfort you. Now, I know that seems minor, but I think we need to think about that sort of thing in every facet of our lives to make sure we are people with the utmost integrity. We are people who are truthful and honest. We are people whose yeses are yes, whose no's are no, people who keep our word. Because when it comes to truthfulness, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. Our effectiveness in evangelism is at stake when it comes to our truthfulness. It is. Because if we can't be trusted to deal truthfully in everyday matters, then we won't be trusted by people when we try to share the gospel. So our effectiveness when it comes to reaching others with the saving message of Jesus Christ is at stake when it comes to our honesty. And you know what else is at stake? Our souls are at stake. Our souls are at stake.
Teachers are exiting right now. We do have 2 adult Sunday school classes, one here in the auditorium, one in the Van Zant Center Library.